The massive alien ship floated in space like a dark metal mountain. Admiral Kyle stood at the big window on his ship's bridge, looking down at the burning planet below. The crystal cities that once sparkled like diamonds were now broken and smoking. Another world had fallen to the Kithran hegemony. Kyle had 6 eyes instead of 2 like humans. His skin was gray and tough like armor. He had been conquering planets for over 200 years, and this felt just like all the others. The crystal people of Veltara had fought hard, but they all fought hard at first. Then they learned the truth. Nobody could beat the Kithrans, sir. "The planet is ours," said Sub-Commander Vorth, walking up behind him. Vorth was younger, with only 4 eyes, but he was learning fast. 2 million crystal people are still alive. We can use them as workers. Kyle nodded. That was always how it went. First the big ships would come, then the fighting, then the surrender. Then the survivors would spend the rest of their lives working in Kithran mines and factories. It was simple. It was efficient. It had worked on 846 worlds before this one. "How long did this take?" Kyle asked. 12 days, sir." They lasted longer than most. Kyle made a sound like clicking his tongue, except he had no tongue. The crystal people had surprised him. Their energy weapons actually damaged 3 of his ships before he destroyed their weapon factories. Most planets gave up after the first day of fighting. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Deck from across the bridge. "The scout ships have found our next target." Kyle turned away from the dying planet below. There was always a next target. The hegemony never stopped growing. It was there. Way strong people ruled, weak people served. It was the natural order of the universe. "Show me," Kyle said. A big screen lit up showing a yellow star with several planets around it. The third planet from the star was blue and green with white clouds. It looked pretty, like a jewel floating in space. "Single star system," Deck reported, reading from his instruments. "The third planet has life. They call it Earth. The people. They call themselves humans." "How many?" Kyle asked. "About 8 billion, sir. They have nuclear weapons and basic space travel. They have been to their own moon, but nowhere else." Kyle studied the planet on the screen. 8 billion was a lot of people. That meant a lot of workers for the hegemony's factories. Also meant the planet was probably rich in resources. "Are they united?" Kyle asked. This was always an important question. United planets were harder to conquer, but they also surrendered faster once they realized they could not win. "No, sir," Deck said, sounding amused. "They are divided into almost 200 different countries. They fight each other all the time. Some are rich, some are poor. They cannot agree on anything." Kyle's mandibles clicked together, and this was even better than he thought. A divided planet was always easier to conquer. The different countries would blame each other instead of working together. Some would try to make deals with the Kithrans. Others would fight. The confusion would make conquest simple. "Weapons?" he asked. "Nuclear missiles? Chemical explosives? Metal projectiles?" Deck replied. "Very primitive. Our strongest weapons could barely damage our smallest ships." Sub-Commander Vorth stepped forward. "Sir, should I prepare the standard conquest fleet? 300 ships should be more than enough for a primitive world like this." Kyle thought about it. 300 ships had conquered the crystal people, who had much better weapons than these humans. Gah. But 8 billion people meant this might take a few extra days. Make it 400 ships, Kyle decided. "I want this conquest to be fast. The longer it takes, the more time they have to cause trouble." "Yes, sir," Vorth said. "How long should I tell the crews to prepare for?" Kyle looked at the beautiful blue planet on the screen again. It reminded him of Macrane Prime, which had fallen in just 3 days. The Macrane had been united in much. More advanced than these humans, these Earth people were divided and primitive. "Tell them to pack for 1 week," Kyle said. "This should be finished quickly." Around the bridge, his officers began preparing for another conquest. They checked weapons, counted supplies, and sent messages to the other ships in the fleet. It was all routine now. They had done this hundreds of times before. Kyle took one last look at the crystal planet below. The fires were finally going out. Soon, Kithran construction ships would arrive to build new cities, new factories, new mines. The surviving crystal people would work there for the rest of their lives, making things for the hegemony. In a few months, this dead world would be productive again. In a few years, young Kithrans would not even remember that other people had once lived here. It would just be another Kithran world, like all the others. Set course for Earth, Kyle commanded. Signal the fleet. We leave in 6 hours. As his ships prepared to jump through space to their next target, Admiral Kyle felt satisfied. Earth would be conquest number 848. Soon it would be 849, then 850. The hegemony would keep growing forever. He had no way of knowing that the small blue planet on his screen would be the last world he would ever conquer. The Kitharan fleet appeared in Earth's sky like a swarm of metal insects. 400 massive ships took positions around the moon, their dark holes blocking out stars that humans had looked at for thousands of years, in Seoul. President Kim stared at the screens in his emergency bunker. The alien ships were bigger than anything humans had ever built. Each one was the size of a city, and there were hundreds of them. How long do we have? Kim asked General Park, who stood beside him looking at satellite images. Maybe 12 hours before they reach Earth? Orbit Park replied. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. The other world leaders want to talk immediately. On the main Kithran ship, Admiral Kyle watched Earth through his bridge windows. The planet looked even prettier up close, with its blue oceans and green lands. But he was confused by what his instruments were showing him. Sub-Commander Vorth, Kyle called. Explain this to me. Why are they not responding properly? Vorth looked at his screens with confusion. Sir, some of their countries are moving military forces. Others are trying to send us peaceful messages. A few seem to be hiding. They're people underground? They're not acting like a normal planet. Kyle had conquered many worlds, but they all followed the same pattern. First, the planet's leaders would try to negotiate. Then they would realize it was hopeless and surrender. These humans were doing everything at once. Are they stupid? Asked. I do not think so, sir. They have nuclear weapons and space travel, but they seem to be... disorganized. Kyle decided to follow standard procedure. It always worked eventually. Send the surrender message, he ordered. The message that reached every radio, television, and phone on Earth was simple, and had been sent to 847 other worlds. People of Earth, you are now part of the Kithran hegemony. Give up all weapons and prepare to serve us. If you fight back, we will destroy your planet completely. In Seoul, President Kim listened to the alien message with his emergency cabinet. Defense Minister Lee was the first to speak. Our missiles cannot hurt ships that big, Lee said, but our nuclear weapons might slow them down. That would just make them angry, argued Foreign Minister Choi. We should try to negotiate. Dr. Yoon, who ran the country's science programs, had been studying the alien transmission. Their language suggests they have done this many times before. I do not think they want to negotiate. Similar conversations were happening in every capital, city on Earth. The American president wanted to fight. The Chinese premier suggested surrender. The Russian leader talked about nuclear strikes. The European Union could not agree on anything. What came back to the Kithran fleet was unlike anything they had ever received. Instead of one response from a planetary government, they got hundreds of different messages in dozens of languages. Some countries declared war, others begged for mercy. A few tried to pretend they were not part of Earth at all. Admiral Kyle stared at his communication screens in disbelief. Are they refusing to surrender? It seems like some are surrendering and some are not, Vorth replied, sounding as confused as his commander. I have never seen anything like this. Then we follow procedure, Kyle decided. Demonstration bombardment. Target their military bases. Orbital bombardment began at noon, Earth time. Massive energy beams struck military installations on 3 continents. Air Force bases in America vanished in balls of fire. Naval ports in Europe disappeared in clouds of steam. Army headquarters in Asia melted into glass. But instead of terrifying Earth into surrender, the attacks seemed to make things worse. Some countries immediately launched nuclear missiles at the alien fleet. The missiles exploded harmlessly against Kithran shields, but they kept coming. Other nations began evacuating their cities. A few actually started working together for the first time in decades. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Thek, "we are receiving thousands of new transmissions. Some are surrender offers, but others are ... threats." Threats. Kyle could not believe it. From a primitive planet that cannot even hurt our ships. "Yes. Sir, one message says they will fight until every human is dead. Another says they will learn our technology and use it against us. A third says, well, sir, it contains many words I cannot translate, but they sound very angry." In his bunker in Seoul, President Kim was having the strangest conversation of his life. On his screen were the faces of world leaders who had been enemies just hours before. "We need to work together," Kim said to the American president. "We are all dead." "The Korean is right," said the German chancellor. "Our only chance is cooperation." "But what can we do?" asked the Japanese prime minister. "Their technology is centuries ahead of ours." Dr. Yoon, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "We learn. We survive. It is what humans do best." Back on the Kithrin flagship, Admiral Kyle was starting to feel something he had never experienced in 200 years of conquest. Uncertainty. "Sub-Commander, how long did it take to conquer the Crystal People?" 12 days, sir. And the Makrani?" 3 days, sir." Kyle looked at Earth again. It still looked beautiful and peaceful from space, but the planet's response had been anything but peaceful, sir. Vorth said quietly. "What are your orders?" For the first time in his long career, Admiral Kyle was not sure. These humans were not following the rules. They were not acting like a species that knew it was beaten. "Begin standard pacification procedures," he finally said. ... Prepare for extended operations. 3 years had passed since the Kithrins first arrived at Earth. Admiral Kyle stood in the same spot on his bridge, but everything else had changed. His once shiny uniform was now dirty and torn. His 6 eyes were tired from sleepless nights. The war that should have lasted 1 week had become a nightmare that would not end. Admiral Sub-Commander Vorth said, walking up with another bad report. "We lost 3 more transport ships yesterday. Humans somehow got through our shields again." Kill's mandibles clicked with anger. "How is this possible? Weapons should not work against our technology. They are learning, sir. Time we shoot down one of their ships, they study the pieces. Okay, every Catheran weapon they find gets taken apart and copied. They are getting smarter." In a deep bunker under Seoul, General Song looked at holographic maps showing the positions of alien ships. The maps were made from stolen Kithrin technology that human scientists had figured out how to use. Next to him, Chief Engineer Nam studied pieces of alien equipment. "The quantum computers from their crashed fighter will help us," Nam reported. "Dr. Han thinks we can connect it to our satellite network." General Song nodded but did not smile. Good news was rare these days. "How many people have we lost?" 17 million soldiers, 43 million civilians, Nam replied quietly. "But the aliens have lost 60 ships and maybe 400,000 troops. The numbers were terrible, but they proved something important. The Kithrins could be hurt. They could be killed. Most importantly, they were not winning as fast as they expected." General Song remembered the early days of the war. When human jets and missiles barely scratched the alien ships, 3 years later human weapons could punch through Kithrin armor. Not because humans had suddenly become smarter, but because they had learned to think differently. "Sir," said Major Jang, looking up from her computer, "we intercepted another alien message. Admiral Kyle is asking his home planet for more ships." "What did they tell him?" "They said no. They told him he already has enough ships to conquer a primitive world." Song almost smiled at that. The alien leaders thought Earth was primitive, but their own admiral was begging for help. That meant the war was going better than it looked. On the Kithrin flagship, Admiral Kyle was having the worst conversation of his career. The face of Supreme Commander Kex filled his communication screen, and Kex did not look happy. Admiral Kex said in a voice like grinding metal, "Explain to me why one primitive planet is taking 3 years to conquer." "Sir, these humans are different," Kyle replied. "They do not follow normal patterns. When we destroy their armies, they build new ones. When we kill their leaders, new ones take their place. They refuse to accept defeat. Every species refuses at first." That is why. We use fear. Fear does not work on them, sir. When we destroy their cities, they get angry instead of scared. When we kill their soldiers, more volunteers join their army. They are not acting rationally. Supreme Commander Kex's 4 eyes narrowed. Are you telling me that you cannot defeat a species that has not even left its own star system? Kyle wanted to explain, but he knew it would sound like excuses. How could he describe the human tactic of turning their own fighter ships into missiles? How could he explain soldiers who would blow themselves up just to damage one Kithran tank? How could he make Kex understand that these humans fought like they had nothing to lose? Sir, I need more ships. The humans have learned to use our own technology against us. They modify our weapons, hack our computers, and turn our equipment into traps. You have 400 ships, Admiral. The Crystal People were conquered with 300. The Crystal People surrendered when they realized they could not win. These humans know they cannot win, but they keep fighting anyway. There was a long silence. Finally, Kex spoke again. You have 6 more months, Admiral. If Earth is not conquered by then, you will be replaced. The transmission ended, leaving Kyle alone with his thoughts. How could he conquer a species in 6 months when 3 years had not been enough? Sir Vorth said quietly, there is something else. We are receiving reports from other worlds in the hegemony. Some of the slave populations are ... asking questions. What kind of questions? About Earth? About the war? About whether the hegemony can really be defeated? Kyle felt a cold fear in his chest. For 3,000 years, the hegemony had ruled through fear. Every conquered species believed that resistance was impossible. But now, for the first time, one planet was proving that the Kithrans could be fought. Double the security on all. Slave worlds, Kial ordered, and increase the jamming of their communications. I do not want word of this war spreading. But even as he gave the order, Kyle knew it was too late. Across the galaxy, billions of enslaved beings were hearing whispers of a small blue planet that refused to surrender. They were learning that the word impossible might not mean what they thought. Back on Earth, General Song received a report that made him smile for the first time in months. Human resistance groups had captured an entire Kithran supply depot, complete with weapons, vehicles, and most importantly, communication equipment. Can we use their transmitters? Song asked. Dr. Hun nodded. Can send messages anywhere in their empire. Song's smile grew wider. It was time to let the galaxy know that Earth was still fighting. The message began as a simple transmission from Earth, but it would change the entire galaxy. President Kim sat in front of a camera in his underground bunker, speaking words that would travel to every corner of the Kithran Empire. People of the stars, Kim said, his voice calm but strong. My name is Kim, and I speak for the humans of Earth. For 3 years, we have fought the Kithran hegemony. We have lost millions of our people, but we have not lost hope. We send this message to tell you something the Kithrans do not want you to know. They can be beaten. The transmission used stolen Kithran equipment to reach across space faster than light. On 847 conquered worlds, billions of enslaved beings heard something they had never expected, the sound of successful resistance. On Veltara Prime, the Crystal People who had survived the Kithran conquest stopped their work in the mines. Elder Thex, whose crystalline body still bore scars from the bombardment 3 years ago, translated the human words for the others. Listen, Dex whispered to the other crystal workers. The small flesh beings are still fighting. They are still free. On Macranie Station, the reptilian Macranie slaves paused their mining operations. Captain Sek, who had once commanded the planetary defense fleet, felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in decades. Hope. We share with you our tactics, our technologies, our hope. Kim's voice continued across the galaxy. The Kithrans rule through fear, but fear only works if you believe defeat is certain. It is not certain. What followed the speech was revolutionary. Detailed technical information flooded the airwaves. Blueprints for weapons that could hurt Kithran ships. Computer viruses that could crash their systems. And most importantly, proof that the seemingly invincible hegemony could bleed. On the Kytherin flagship orbiting Earth. Admiral Kyle watched in horror as reports flooded in from across the Empire. His communication screens lit up with emergency signals from dozens of worlds. "Sir," Communications Officer Vec reported, his voice shaking. "Uprising on Valtara Prime, sabotage at the Quentari mining facility, coordinated attacks in the Morth. Secta Admiral, it is happening everywhere." Subcommander Vorth studied the tactical displays showing hegemony worlds marked in red rebellion. Resistance, revolution. The humans have not just given our slaves hope, they have given them the tools to fight back. Admiral Kyle realized with growing terror that Earth had not just been a difficult conquest. It had become the spark that would burn down everything. The hegemony had built over 3,000 years on Valtara Prime. Elder Thex led a group of crystal workers to the weapons storage facility. Using the human-provided blueprints, they had built crude but effective energy disruptors from mining equipment. "For 3 years, we believed we were alone," Thex said to the assembled rebels. "Now we know the humans are still fighting. If they can resist, so can we." The Crystal People's revolt began with the destruction of the Kytherin garrison. The alien soldiers who had grown lazy after years of easy occupation were caught completely off guard. Within hours, the entire planet was in rebellion. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On Macrani Station, Captain Sek used human hacking techniques to turn the station's own defense systems against its Kytherin occupiers. On distant Zarian, the insectoid Zirians emerged from their underground hiding places with weapons copied from human designs. Sir Vorth reported to Admiral Kyle, "We have lost contact with 17 worlds. The rebels are using the human communication codes to coordinate their attacks." Admiral Kyle felt something he had never experienced in his 200 years of service panic. The hegemony's strength had always been its reputation for invincibility. But the humans had shattered that reputation, and now the cracks were spreading everywhere. "Signal Central Command," Kyle ordered. "Request immediate deployment of all reserve fleets. We need to crush these rebellions before they spread further." But it was already too late. The human broadcast had reached every corner of the galaxy, and with it came something more dangerous than any weapon: the idea that freedom was possible in the deepest minds of Altair 7. Slave workers who had never seen the surface began planning their escape. On the factory worlds of the Centauri system, millions of workers started building weapons instead of Kytherin goods. Even in the heart of the hegemony, on worlds that had been conquered for centuries, the whispers of rebellion began to spread. That called out, his voice filled with desperation. "Central Command is responding. They're sending ... everything." Kyle looked at the transmission with relief. Every available ship, every reserve unit, every last resource the hegemony possessed was being sent to crush the rebellions and finish the conquest of Earth. "How many ships?" he asked. 12,000, sir." "The entire hegemony fleet?" Kyle nodded grimly. 12,000 ships would be enough to turn Earth into dust and then systematically destroy every rebel world. The hegemony would survive, but barely on Earth. General Song received the intelligence report about the incoming fleet with calm acceptance. He had known this moment would come. The humans had pushed too hard, spread their message too far. Now the Kytherins would come with everything they had. "How long do we have?" Song asked. 6 weeks, replied Major Jang. "Maybe less." Song looked around the command center at the faces of his staff. They all knew what 12,000 ships meant. Earth would not survive the coming battle. But that was not the point anymore. "Send a message to all rebel worlds," Song ordered. "Tell them to prepare for the final battle. Tell them that even if Earth falls, the fire of freedom will not die." Across the galaxy, the greatest military force in galactic history prepared for its final battle. But for the first time in 3,000 years, the Kytherin hegemony was fighting not just for conquest but for survival. The final battle for Earth began with the largest fleet in galactic history. 12,000 Kytherin ships filled the space around Earth like a metal storm cloud. Every vessel the hegemony had ever built was their battleships the size of cities. Carriers packed with fighters and planet-killer weapons that could turn worlds into dust. Admiral Kyle stood on the bridge of his flagship, wearing his ceremonial armor for what he knew would be his last battle. Around him, his officers prepared for the complete destruction of the small blue world that had caused so much trouble. "Fleet status?" Kyle asked. "All ships in position," Admiral Subcommander Vorth replied. "We have enough firepower to destroy 100 Earths." Kyle nodded. This time, there would be no mistakes, no long war, no human tricks. Just overwhelming force that would turn Earth into a warning to every other world in the galaxy. On Earth, General Song stood in his command bunker, deep under Sol. Around him, officers from every nation worked together, coordinating humanity's final stand. The screens showed the massive alien fleet, so many ships that they blocked out the stars. "Enemy strength?" Song asked. 12,000 vessels, sir," Major Jang reported quietly. "Everything they have left, the odds were impossible. Humanity had maybe 300 ships, most of them built from captured alien technology. They had orbital platforms and ground-based weapons, but against 12,000 enemy ships, it was like throwing rocks at a mountain." "Sir," Captain O called from the orbital defense station, "we are detecting massive energy buildup from the alien fleet."
Oh, they are charging.
"Planet killer weapons?" Song took a deep breath. He had known this moment would come. 3 years of fighting had led to this humanity's last stand. "Execute protocol, Prometheus," Song ordered. Across the solar system, humanity's final plan began. It was not a plan to win. That was impossible. It was a plan to make sure that even in defeat, Earth would take as many enemies as possible with them, hidden throughout the asteroid belt. Quantum mines that had been planted over months suddenly activated. The explosions tore through the outer edge of the Kithrin fleet, like invisible fire. Dozens of ships vanished in brilliant flashes of light from concealed platforms on Earth's moon. Modified missiles launched using Kithrin technology turned against its creators. The missiles phased through alien shields because they used the same frequency codes the Kithrins used for their own weapons. But the real horror for the Kithrins came from something they had never seen. Before enemy soldiers who had turned self-sacrifice into military strategy. Captain Lee commanded humanity's flagship Sol's Fury, ship built from the wreckage of destroyed Kithrin vessels. As his ship accelerated toward the enemy dreadnought, he spoke calmly into his radio. "For Earth," Lee said, "for all the worlds that will be free," his ship loaded with captured antimatter weapons struck the Kithrin command vessel in an explosion that lit up half the solar system. 17 enemy capital ships died in that single blast. Admiral Kyle watched in shock as similar attacks happened throughout his fleet. Human pilots were turning their ships into guided missiles. Soldiers were destroying enemy vessels by crashing into them. Civilians were detonating orbital stations when aliens tried to capture them. "Admiral," Vorth shouted over the noise of explosions, "they are not trying to win, they are trying to kill as many of us as possible." Kyle understood with growing horror. These humans were not fighting like any species he had ever encountered. They were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to ensure that their enemies would pay the highest possible price for victory. "Sir," communications officer that called. "Out in panic, the humans are broadcasting our fleet positions to every rebel world. Ships are coming out of hyperspace all around us." Through his tactical display, Kiel saw the impossible. Fleets from hundreds of worlds, crystal ships from Veltara, reptilian vessels from Macron, insectoid fighters from Zarian, all emerging from hyperspace around Earth. Every enslaved species in the galaxy had come to join humanity's final battle. The former slaves had learned well from their human teachers. They used the same desperate tactics, the same willingness to die, the same refusal to accept defeat. Crystal ships exploded against Kithrin hulls. Reptilian fighters dove into enemy engines. Insectoid bombers sacrificed themselves to destroy alien weapon systems. Admiral Vorth said, his voice filled with terror, "We are losing the fleet. Half our ships are destroyed or damaged." Kayal stared at the battle display, showing his once mighty armada being torn apart by enemies who should have been helpless. The hegemony's greatest strength, their reputation for invincibility, had become their greatest weakness. Every conquered species had risen up at once, inspired by humanity's example. "Sir, the flagship is taking heavy damage," Thek reported as the ship shook around them. "Hull breaches on all decks. Engine failure in 3 minutes." As his ship died around him, Admiral Kyle finally understood the terrible truth. The Kithrin hegemony had not just come to conquer one more world. They had awakened something that would destroy everything they had built over 3,000 years. The final irony struck him as enemy fire tore through the bridge. His people had sought to claim Earth as their 848th conquest. Instead, Earth had become the spark that freed all 847 worlds they had already conquered. "This is President Kim of the Free Earth Coalition," came a transmission broadcast across the galaxy as the last Kithrin ships exploded. "The Kithrin hegemony is ended. To all worlds, to all peoples, you are free," trying to conquer humanity. The Kithrins had made their last and greatest mistake.